Alright guys, today we're going to talk about a man who unexpectedly carved his name throughout the books of England, Richard the Lionheart. From the time that he was a child, it could easily be seen that Richard would make his mark. For the most part, he was a Frenchman, his mother being Eleanor, the Duchess of Aquitaine, and his father, despite being a man who was originally from France, was Henry II, King of England. As a child, Richard spent half his years in England before making his way to France to live with his mother at the age of 8. He was tall, bore red and yellow hair, and highly skilled in the art of creating compositions. Eventually, Richard's father and his mother began to divide the inheritance for Richard and his brothers, which honestly didn't turn out too well. Richard's brother, young Henry, wasn't satisfied with his share of the split. He was next in line to be the King of England, but since he'd still be living in the shadow of his father, he wouldn't have any actual power. Richard, on the other hand, became the Duke of Aquitaine and made off to his territory shortly after. Just like Richard, young Henry too wanted independence free from his father's reign. And since it was something that his father had promised him, Henry had to show his pops who was the boss. In order to get even, young Henry decides to go behind his father's back and meet up with the French ruler, King Louis VII. Richard and their brother Geoffrey following his footsteps not too much later. King Louis agrees to help the boys out, going as far as inducting Richard into knighthood for a proper excuse of them having ties. Surprisingly, there were several nobles from England that were already prepared to rise up against their father in a heartbeat from his own kingdom. These dudes are so fake. I've been waiting to overthrow this dude. I just needed a reason, just one cause. Couple of years down the road and the rebellion was in full effect. Now, I do want to mention that speculation says that Richard's mother was the one that inspired them to go through with the rebellion in the first place. This is further supported by the fact that she had no problem with the uprisings and took the side of her children when things started to go down. Now, y'all know me, I couldn't help but feel like this scenario was a bit shaky. To have your own children plotting against you and your wife agrees with it? Now it's got me looking at Henry like, okay Henry, what the hell did you do? Come to find out, Henry was out here having multiple affairs and their marriage was on the rocks to begin with. So she conspired against him. And in response to this betrayal, Henry II had Richard's mother captured and taken in as a prisoner, with his mother being in captivity and young Henry out pulling forces in his own region. Richard had no choice but to fight his father's men on his own. So at the age of 16, he gathered as many rebels as he could and established his own base in the city of Santa. His father, who had about 20,000 men at his disposal, was making his way through France, putting King Louis on the jets. Where you going, son? I thought this is what you wanted. His father then makes an attempt to give his sons a peace offering. We can squash this right now, go back to the crib, and laugh about this over a couple of drinks. King Louis, however, told Richard and his brother that they couldn't deal with their father anymore. So they told him no. His father said fine, and launched a surprise attack on Richard's base, capturing most of his guards in the process. Fortunately, Richard was already with the getaway plan. He took a couple of his soldiers and dipped out, taking refuge at Chateau de Taillebourg. Richard's father then leaves France to make sure that things were all good back in England. The moment that he gets back, he immediately goes into battle with Louis and young Henry. His father slaps them around a little bit, squashed the beef with Louis, and signed a peace treaty to get things back stable again. This treaty, however, did not include Richard or his brothers. Oh nah, remember when y'all tried to play me? I'm still beefing with y'all. So you've done your own father dirty, and the dude that you betrayed him for left you in the dust. It's a cold game out here, people. Y'all won't believe this right here. This dude Richard goes to his father's court and drops to his feet, crying, begging for forgiveness. You going out real sad right now, Richard. So his father squashed it, his brothers came home, and the feud came to a close. So now that the war is over, it was now time for Richard to deal with the same nobles that fought on his side when he went against his father. He was entrusted with making sure that everything went back to normal in all the castles that were invaded. In order to pay homage for the effort and the leadership that he put forth during the time, Richard received the title Lionheart for his fearless endeavors. It appeared as if Richard was actually making an attempt to redeem himself. Unfortunately, his father didn't trust it and still kept an eye out in case he got any bright ideas. He continues to put down the rebels, earning the loyalty of some, but further besmirching his name to all the others. I can only imagine that this started to go to his head, as eventually Richard refused to show respect to his own brother Henry, despite him being heir to the king. Years later, young Henry said, "Fine, you don't want to show me respect? Then I'll make you." And he invaded Richard's domain, hoping that he could bring him down a notch. Things took a turn, however, when Henry ended up contracting the inflammatory disease, dysentery, and ended up passing away because of it. Richard then joins forces with Philip II and went up against his father again until their final encounter. Before his father passed away, Richard was able to convince his people to name him as the heir, and he successfully took over the throne of England after his death. Prior to his official crowning, Richard decided to fight for the church, claiming that he had put his tasteless ways in the past. He was now going to make his name one worthy with being associated with the cross. Upon receiving his title as the new king, Richard got together with Philip II and agreed to go on the Third Crusade. Long story short, the Crusades were a series of expeditions to take back the Holy Lands. However, the Second Crusade ended in complete disaster and a win on the Muslim side. Richard wasn't about to let that go down. So he begins to raise taxes on everybody. This man was getting money by any means necessary. The people, his father's treasury, even the nobles were stuck paying more money so he could afford to go on this mission. Once he had collected an amount that he deemed was enough, Richard went off to help his sister escape from captivity, took over the entire island of Cyprus, and landed in Accra, Israel, to begin his infiltration of the Holy Land. During the battle for Accra, Richard was said to have fallen ill with the scurvy, and despite his sickness, it's said that he rode in on a stretcher, shooting people off the walls with a crossbow. Yeah, alright. After successfully taking Accra by force, Richard got into a dispute with Philip over who gets what when the war was over. Okay, shouldn't y'all have figured this out before y'all went into the war? Anyway, Richard's relationship with Philip was already on the fence for multiple reasons. Philip wanted half of Cyprus, and he wanted to be king of Jerusalem when the mission was over. Naturally, Richard wasn't having it, so Philip left him right there by himself in enemy territory with no allies. I like challenges, but not challenges like this. Leopold was also at the scene. Back when Richard had a shipwreck on Cyprus, the ruler tried to exploit him for a good portion of his belongings. So Richard took over his entire island. The problem here was that Leopold was related to this ruler. Now Leopold and Richard have beef as well. Who do you think you are, Richard? You think you can just go around taking anything that you want? I'm not having it, buddy. So let me get this straight. I wreck my ship. The guy takes my belongings, he takes my sister, and he takes my fiance hostage. And I'm supposed to just let that ride? Man, fuck you and him. Following the intensity of their heated argument, Richard's men chopped up Leopold's flag and threw it in a moat outside the city of Acre. And Leopold left the crusade immediately. You're on your own now, my guy. Despite being deserted by his allies, Richard continued to go through with the initial plan and makes his way towards Jerusalem. At the time, Richard, by association, had access to several Muslim prisoners that he had planned to use as a bribe against their leader, Saladin. So he set up a deal. Look, Saladin, let's not make this harder than it has to be. Hand over the money, hand over the cross, and I'll let your people walk away free. Unfortunately for the prisoners, Saladin took too long to come up with Richard's money. So he decided to have nearly 3,000 Muslim prisoners decapitated. And this is one of the many things that ran Richard's reputation as a king straight into the ground. Why? Because Saladin retaliated by doing the exact same thing to all his Christian prisoners. Can't we all just get along? Following this massacre, Richard makes his way to the next city, entering the Battle of Arsuf. Men who were under Saladin were so infuriated by what Richard had done that most of them just started to charge in, hoping that at least some of them would fall through enemy ranks. This lack of coordination is what ended up being their downfall. Taking advantage of their unorganized ways, Richard took some of his troops by sea and launched a surprise attack on Saladin, taking the city of Jaffa along with some of the coastal regions that surround it. Now, despite the whole point of the campaign being to get into Jerusalem, Richard knew that even if he was able to get in, he wouldn't be able to hold the city for long. Not to mention, with him and Philip bumping heads, there's no telling what that man was up to over in England in his absence. So Richard goes with plan B. He tells Saladin they should do a truce, allowing him to keep the cities that they've captured and give Christians the ability to enter the Holy Land as they please, unharmed. Saladin agreed, and Richard made his way back to England. Now, as Richard was taking this fine cruise back to his humble abode, he got caught in a storm, which ended up causing him to lose control and wreck one of his ships again. He was then captured and handed over to the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry IV. The king then demanded 150,000 marks for his ransom. 150 who? Man, I'm not paying you 150,000. Oh, okay, well, I'll just hand you over to Philip then. Wait, hold up. You know what? I think we will come up with that money. So they managed to come up with the ransom. Richard gets released and he returns to his domain back in England. After this, he immediately takes off again to throw hands with Philip over in France. Unfortunately, Richard fell victim to a fatal wound from a crossbow that ended up taking his life when it was all said and done. Before he passed away, the bowman actually told Richard that he was seeking revenge for the death of his father and his siblings. And instead of having him executed, Richard not only forgave the bowman, but he also decided to let him go. That about wraps it up. If you enjoyed the video, please like it up so we can get this trending. Feel free to add information as you see fit, and let me know what you guys think about it. It's your boy Tsiah. I'm out.